Millbrook Regional Medical Center had been a point of pride for 40 years. The original building, a modest brick structure on the edge of town, had expanded twice since the 1980s, and the newer wings still smelled faintly of fresh paint and ambition. Nurses who had worked there for decades remembered when the administrator knew every staff member by name, when the supply closets were never empty, when a broken piece of equipment was replaced within the week. That was before Director Whitmore. His full name was Craig Whitmore, and he arrived on a Tuesday in March with a leather portfolio, a firm handshake, and no medical credentials whatsoever. His background was in corporate restructuring. He had spent 15 years turning struggling hotel chains and regional grocery stores into leaner, more profitable operations. The board had hired him with the specific mandate of reducing operational costs by 20% within 18 months. They had given him the title of executive director, a corner office on the 4th floor, and the full authority to make it happen. He made it happen. Within 6 months, the overnight janitorial crew had been cut from 8 to 3. The physical therapy wing had been consolidated, eliminating 2 full-time therapist positions. Surgical supply ordering had been centralized and reduced, which meant that some mornings the scrub nurses counted instruments twice, hoping the count was wrong. The cafeteria staff went from 12 to 5. The biomedical technician team, responsible for maintaining every piece of equipment in the building, went from 4 certified technicians to 1 part-timer named Roy, who was also responsible for the parking garage gate system and occasionally the boiler room. The nurses talked about it in the break room in the early mornings, before the day shift kicked in and there was no longer time to talk about anything. "Roy hasn't cleared the maintenance ticket on the Hillcroft monitors in 3 weeks," said one. "He's been dealing with the elevator. The elevator isn't keeping anyone alive." They were not wrong, but complaints went into the system, and the system routed them to a middle manager named Sandra, who routed them to a deputy director named Paul, who had learned very quickly that bringing operational complaints to Whitmore's door was a fast way to find yourself on the restructuring list. So the complaints stayed in the system, and the monitors stayed unserviced. Into this building, on a quiet Wednesday in September, walked a woman named Joanna Pryce. She was 31 years old, 5'4", with brown hair she kept in a practical braid and an ID badge that said Registered Nurse Medical Surgical Unit, Float Pool. She had transferred in from a small rural critical access hospital 2 counties over, which nobody at Milbrook had heard of, which was exactly the way she preferred it. She wore plain scrubs, the kind with no logo, no personalization, nothing that invited a second glance. She carried a reusable water bottle and a lunch bag, and she clocked in 3 minutes early every single day. Nobody paid much attention to Joanna Pryce. She was not unfriendly, but she was quiet. She listened more than she spoke. She learned the layout of every floor within her first week, not just the med-surg wing she was assigned to, but the ICU, the cardiac step-down, the emergency department, the supply room on sub-level 2 that still had the old Pyxis machine that nobody had fully decommissioned. She read the policy binder in the break room, the actual physical binder, 3 inches thick, that everyone else used as a monitor stand. She asked questions that seemed almost too basic, like where the backup oxygen regulators were kept, or what the protocol was if the central nurse call system went down. The charge nurse, a veteran named Gloria, thought Joanna was either very new or very thorough. She couldn't decide which. She was neither, but that was not yet apparent. What was apparent, to the people paying attention, was that Director Whitmore was escalating. The first round of cuts had satisfied the board's short-term metrics. The second round was going to require more imagination. In October, he called an all-staff meeting in the main auditorium, a room designed for medical grand rounds that now smelled of budget presentations and anxiety. "Milbrook is at a crossroads," he said, standing at the podium in a charcoal suit that cost more than most of the nurses made in a week. "We have made significant progress, but progress requires continued discipline. I want to be transparent with you." Transparency in Whitmore's vocabulary meant he told you what he was doing while he was doing it and expected gratitude for the warning. The new measures. The float pool would be reduced by 40%. Mandatory overtime would be restructured. the premium rate for overtime hours would be capped. The patient-to-nurse ratio on the med-surg floor would be increased from 4-1 to 6-1 during day shifts. The pharmacy would move to a just-in-time ordering model, meaning certain medications would no longer be stocked as standard inventory but ordered on a case-by-case basis. A hand went up in the back of the auditorium. Whitmore squinted. "Yes? The just-in-time pharmacy model," said the voice. "What's the contingency protocol for time-sensitive medications if there's a supply delay, specifically for anticoagulants and vasopressors?" He could not see who was asking. The auditorium's lights were angled toward the stage. "We'll have standard escalation pathways," he said. "What's the expected turnaround on an emergency order? That'll be determined in the implementation phase." "So it hasn't been determined yet." It was not a question. Whitmore moved on. In the break room afterward, Gloria found Joanna washing out her water bottle at the sink. "That was you, wasn't it?" Gloria said. "In the back." Joanna dried her hands. "Someone had to ask. People have been asking for 8 months. It doesn't do anything." "Maybe," Joanna said. "But it's on the record now." Gloria looked at her for a long moment. "Where did you say you transferred from?" "Harwick Community, over in Carlisle County." "And before that?" Joanna capped her water bottle. "I moved around a lot." She had. That was true. What she did not mention was the nature of the moving around. 18 months embedded with a forward surgical team in a region where the nearest trauma center was a helicopter ride away, where you learned to maintain an airway with improvised equipment and manage hemorrhagic shock with whatever the supply drop had included that week. Before that, 2 years as a flight nurse on a civilian medevac crew. Before that, a nursing degree completed in 3 years instead of 4, because she had tested out of several prerequisites, having spent her teenage years as the daughter of a county paramedic who had taught her the basics before she was legally old enough to apply them. Joanna Pryce had seen people die from bad equipment. She had seen people die from supply failures. She had seen people die because the person in charge had made a decision based on cost rather than outcome, and nobody with the knowledge to push back had been in the room. She had transferred to Milbrook because she had read about Whitmore in a healthcare trade publication. Not a critical piece, a flattering profile. Turnaround specialist brings corporate discipline to healthcare administration. She had read it on a Sunday morning and set her coffee down very carefully, and spent 20 minutes looking up Millbrook Regional's nursing staff vacancies. She was not impulsive. She was precise. The pharmacy change went into effect in November. The first problem emerged within 3 weeks. A patient in room 412, a 67-year-old man named Arthur, admitted for a cardiac arrhythmia, had been prescribed amiodarone. Amiodarone was one of the medications now subject to the just-in-time ordering model, classified by the new pharmacy director as non-formulary standard stock. The order was placed. The estimated delivery was 4 hours. Arthur did not have 4 hours. His rhythm was deteriorating. The floor nurse, a 26-year-old named Devin, who had been working double shifts for 6 days straight, had called the pharmacy twice. The attending physician had been paged. The attending physician was simultaneously managing a post-op patient on the 3rd floor and a sepsis case in the emergency department because 2 of the hospitalists had left the month before and had not been replaced. Joanna was not assigned to room 412. She was at the end of the hall, completing her documentation. She heard Devin's voice go tight, not loud, just tight, the specific register of a nurse who is running out of options and time simultaneously. She closed her laptop and walked down the hall. Devin looked up. "I'm fine." "I know," Joanna said. "What's his current rhythm?" Devin told her. Joanna looked at the monitor. She did the math that Devin was also doing, and she did not like the answer. "Is there amiodarone in the crash cart?" "The crash cart has the emergency dose. If I pull from it before." "I know the protocol," Joanna said. "Call it. Document that you called it. The time. The reason. Everything. I'll be back in 4 minutes." She went to the charge desk, picked up the phone, and called the pharmacy directly. Not the extension, but the direct line that she had memorized during her first week. She reached a technician named Miles, who she had spoken to twice before, carefully and without urgency, establishing herself as someone competent and reasonable before she ever needed something. Miles. It's Joanna on 4. I need to know if there is any amiodarone currently in transit from the dispensing cabinet to any other floor that hasn't been signed for yet. There was. A dose for a patient in the cardiac step-down who had been discharged that morning. The dose was sitting in the pneumatic tube system staging area, flagged for return. I need that dose redirected, Joanna said. I'm documenting a patient emergency in room 412. I need you to pull the discharge flag and send it to 4, right now. Miles hesitated. The protocol for redirecting medications involved a physician order. The physician order is being generated as we speak, Joanna said. I need that tube sent in 30 seconds or the order isn't going to matter. The tube arrived in 90 seconds. Arthur received his medication. His rhythm stabilized within the hour. Devin sat in the break room afterward and stared at the table. How did you know about the staging area? She said. It was not quite a question. I asked Roy about the tube system my first week. He was happy to explain it. Nobody ever asks Roy anything. Devin looked at her. What are you doing on a float pool assignment? Floating? Joanna said simply, and refilled her water bottle. She wrote up the incident that night. Not to her charge nurse and not to the floor manager. She submitted it through the hospital's patient safety reporting portal, which was technically required for any medication delay that affected patient care. The report was detailed, factual, and carefully worded to avoid any language that could be dismissed as emotional or anecdotal. It cited the specific policy, the timeline, the clinical outcome, and the systemic factor, the just-in-time pharmacy model that had created the delay. The report went into the system. The system sent it to the patient safety officer, a man named Ted, who had been in the role for 11 years and had a gift for translating problems into language that felt like action without requiring any. Ted filed the report. He sent Joanna a formed response thanking her for her diligence. Joanna had not expected anything else. She had been building a file. December brought the next development. Director Whitmore, in a memo distributed on the 23rd, 2 days before Christmas, which Joanna noted was not an accident, announced that effective January 1st, the nursing float pool would be restructured from 40 full-time equivalent positions to 22. The remaining positions would be reclassified as per diem, with no guaranteed hours, no benefits, and no seniority protections. 14 nurses received termination notices with their holiday paychecks. Gloria, who had worked at Milbrook for 22 years, found Joanna in the stairwell that afternoon. Gloria's eyes were dry, but barely. I'm not on the list, Gloria said. But half my night shift is. I know, Joanna. Gloria stopped. What are you actually doing? I've been watching you for 3 months. You're keeping records, you're documenting everything. You're asking questions that sound like routine and aren't. What is this? Joanna leaned against the stair railing. She was quiet for a moment. Have you ever filed a complaint with the state health department? She asked. I've thought about it. It requires a specific format. It requires documentation, dates, patient outcomes, specific policy violations. The complaint can't just be the conditions here are bad. It has to cite actual regulatory violations. Joint Commission Standards, CMS Conditions of Participation. Gloria stared at her. You've already filed one. I filed the groundwork for one, Joanna said. I need 3 more pieces before it's strong enough to trigger a mandatory investigation rather than a discretionary review. What 3 pieces? 1 more patient safety incident linked directly to the staffing reduction or the pharmacy model. Documentation that Whitmore was informed of the risks and dismissed them, and a copy of the maintenance backlog. The maintenance backlog? The biomedical equipment tickets. They're public record under the state health code because this hospital accepts Medicare. I've already requested them under a public records request. I'm waiting on the response. Gloria sat down on the step. You know they'll fire you. They'll try, Joanna said. But retaliation against a patient safety reporter is a federal violation under the Affordable Care Act, Section 1558. I've already established the timeline. Any termination after this complaint is filed will be very difficult to characterize as coincidental. Where did you learn all this? Joanna considered the question. I've been in situations before where the person in charge was making decisions that were going to get people killed, and I've watched other people try to stop it by getting angry, or by complaining to the person directly, or by walking out. None of those work." She paused. "The only thing that works is making it cost more to continue than to stop." The maintenance records arrived in January. Joanna read through 63 pages of deferred equipment tickets. She cross-referenced them with patient incident reports she had pulled from the hospital's public quality reporting data. She found 4 instances in the past 8 months where a documented equipment malfunction had contributed to a patient care complication. 3 of the 4 pieces of equipment had open maintenance tickets dating back more than 90 days. The second patient safety incident arrived on its own, as she had known it eventually would. A woman in her 50s named Patricia, admitted for routine gallbladder surgery, recovery and post-op, had her call button fail to register at the nursing station for 47 minutes. The call button system had an open maintenance ticket. The post-op nurse, one of 2 covering 12 patients due to the staffing reduction, had not been alerted. Patricia had experienced post-surgical bleeding that was caught when a transport aide happened to look through the window. She survived. The outcome could have been otherwise. Joanna filed the report that same night. She now had what she needed. She had also, over the previous 4 months, sent 3 separate emails to Director Whitmore's administrative assistant requesting a meeting to discuss patient safety concerns. The first 2 had received no response. The third had received a reply from Paul, the deputy director, offering a meeting with a floor supervisor. Joanna had attended the meeting, raised her concerns in clear, documented terms, and received a written summary afterward that characterized her concerns as noted for future operational review. Whitmore had been informed. He had chosen not to act. She submitted the formal complaint to the State Health Department on a Thursday morning in February. It was 41 pages, including all supporting documentation. She sent a copy simultaneously to the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services regional office, and, because the maintenance failures met the threshold, to the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. Then she clocked in for her shift. She did not tell anyone except Gloria, and she told Gloria only after the complaint was submitted, in the break room, over coffee, in a tone that could have been describing the weather. "It's filed," she said. Gloria looked at her. "When will we know something?" State Health has 15 days to acknowledge receipt and 45 days to initiate an inspection if the complaint is deemed credible. CMS has a parallel timeline. Given the documentation, I'd expect an acknowledgement within the week. And Whitmore? He won't know anything until investigators contact the hospital directly. That contact is legally required to be made to the governing board, not to the executive director. He'll find out when they do. What Joanna did not fully anticipate, not because she hadn't considered it, but because she had underestimated the specific institutional anxiety of a hospital board, was the speed. 11 days after her complaint was filed, a Friday afternoon in February, 2 investigators from the State Department of Health arrived at Millbrook Regional with credentials and a document request list. They had called ahead by exactly the required 2 hours. They had not called Director Whitmore. They had called the board chair, a retired cardiologist named Dr. Emmett Ferris, who had served in that role for 9 years, and who, upon reading the summary of the complaint that the investigators provided, had sat at his desk for a long time before he picked up the phone. The investigators were escorted to a conference room. The board chair flew in from Scottsdale the next morning. Whitmore was informed at 10 a.m. on Saturday. His response, according to Paul, who told Devin, who told Gloria, who told Joanna, was initially to demand to know who had filed the complaint. Joanna was mopping a spill in the hallway of the 4th floor when Gloria appeared at the supply closet and said, quietly, "He's asking." "He's entitled to know during the investigation," Joanna said. "The investigators will tell him." "Are you scared?" Joanna wrung out the mop. "I've had more frightening days." The investigation took 3 weeks. The inspectors reviewed the maintenance records, the incident reports, the pharmacy logs, the staffing matrices, and the financial documentation. They interviewed nursing staff, the pharmacy director, Roy the biomedical technician, and the attending physicians who were willing to speak on record. They reviewed the 3 emails Joanna had sent to Whitmore's office and the written response from Paul's meeting. They found 17 regulatory violations. 4 of them were classified as immediate jeopardy. The designation reserved for conditions that placed patients at serious risk of harm or death. CMS issued a notice. If the deficiencies were not corrected within a specific timeline, Millbrook Regional would lose its Medicare certification. Without Medicare, the hospital could not function. The board met in emergency session on a Monday evening. Whitmore was present at the beginning of the meeting and not at the end. He cleared his office that Wednesday. The parking spot with his name on it was repainted by Thursday afternoon, which people noted was unusually fast, and which suggested that whoever ordered the repainting had been thinking about it for a while. The interim director was Dr. Emmett Ferris himself, who came out of near retirement to stabilize the situation while the board conducted a proper search. His first act was to reinstate the terminated nurses effective immediately with back pay. His second act was to contract with a biomedical equipment company to clear the entire maintenance backlog within 30 days. His third act was to call a staff meeting and stand in front of the auditorium without a podium and say, in a voice that had the particular gravity of someone who had spent 40 years standing at bedsides, "I owe you an apology. The board should have been watching more carefully. We weren't. That ends now." Nobody applauded. But the silence was different from the silences that had filled that room under Whitmore. It felt like something that could eventually become trust. Joanna was not at the staff meeting. She was on shift. She heard about it from Devin, who had tears in her eyes and seemed faintly embarrassed about it. "Are you going to apply for the director position?" Devin asked. "When they post it." "No, you'd be good at it." "I'd be terrible at it," Joanna said. "I am good at this." She gestured. Not at anything specific, just at the hallway, the rooms, the monitors, the particular organized chaos of a floor that was slowly, carefully, beginning to right itself. Devin looked at her. "You came here specifically to do this, didn't you? You didn't just end up here." Joanna had been asked this before, in different forms, by Gloria and by Miles from the pharmacy, and once by Roy, who had noticed that someone had finally submitted a work order on his behalf, requesting a second biomedical technician, and had made a quiet inquiry about who. She had deflected all of them, gently and with practiced ease. But Devin was 26 and had worked 6-day double shifts for a month and had stood in a patient's room watching a cardiac monitor and not known if help was going to arrive in time. Devin had earned a straighter answer. "I've been in places," Joanna said carefully, "where the decisions being made at the top were going to get people killed. And I've learned that by the time it's obvious to everyone, it's usually too late to stop it cleanly. So you have to start early, before the crisis, when it still looks like just a policy problem. And if there hadn't been a crisis, if we'd gotten lucky and no patient had been hurt, then I would have kept documenting until there was a regulatory violation strong enough to stand on its own. It would have taken longer." She paused, "but it would have gotten here." Devin nodded slowly. "Where do you go next?" The question was more perceptive than Joanna expected. She looked at Devin for a moment. "There are a lot of hospitals," she said. Dr. Emmett Ferris, in the second week of his interim tenure, made a point of walking every floor of the building at least once. He was the kind of physician who had started his career doing exactly that, and he had found that the habit, once acquired, was hard to lose. He found Joanna Pryce at the nurses' station on the 4th floor at 6:15 on a Tuesday morning, at the end of a night shift, helping the incoming day shift nurse reconstruct a medication record that had been partially corrupted by a software glitch. He stood and watched for a moment. She was explaining the documentation method to the younger nurse with the patience of someone who had done this kind of thing in worse conditions and had never lost their composure doing it. "Miss Pryce," he said. She looked up. "Dr. Ferris." He had her file. He had read it twice. The formal complaint documentation alone was a masterwork of clinical precision and regulatory knowledge. He had shown it to the hospital's legal counsel, who had described it, in the particular tone of someone deeply impressed and slightly unnerved, as unusually thorough. I wanted to thank you personally, he said. The documentation spoke for itself, she said. I just assembled it correctly. You kept this building from losing its certification. You kept patients safe. People were already keeping patients safe, she said. Devin and Gloria and the overnight team, and Devin especially. She had been doing it under conditions that should never have been allowed to develop. I gave the complaint somewhere to go. Ferris studied her. He had known a great many nurses over 40 years. He had known very few like this. There's a patient safety officer position opening up, he said. The board is creating a new oversight structure as part of the corrective action plan. It requires someone with clinical credibility and regulatory knowledge and... He paused, looking for the word, a certain kind of persistence. Joanna capped her pen. I appreciate it, she said. I do. But I'd be in a room reviewing reports all day. I am better out here. She said it without apology or false modesty. It was simply accurate, and they both knew it. Ferris nodded. He extended his hand. She shook it. If you ever change your mind, he said. You'll be the first to know, she said, and turned back to the medication record and the young nurse who was waiting, and kept working. The fourth floor slowly got better, not all at once. Institutions don't move that way, but incrementally, in the way that real change moves, through small corrections that accumulate. The pharmacy restocked its formulary. A second biomedical technician was hired. The patient ratios came back down. The maintenance tickets were cleared. Devin, on her first shift with a full staff complement, sat at the nurse's station at the beginning of her shift and just, for a moment, said nothing. Then she picked up her first chart and got to work. Gloria, who had been watching all of this from the particular vantage point of 22 years of institutional memory, said to no one in particular one morning, she knew exactly what she was doing from day one. Nobody disagreed. Joanna Pryce clocked out at the end of her shift that Friday, put on her coat, picked up her lunch bag and her water bottle, and walked out through the main entrance into the cold morning air. She got into her car, and she sat there for a moment with the engine off. She thought about a field hospital in a place that didn't have a name on most maps, where she had learned what it meant to hold a system together with knowledge and nerve when everything around it was failing. She thought about Devin's face in the break room. She thought about Patricia, the woman whose call button had gone unanswered for 47 minutes, who had gone home to her family and did not know how close it had been. Then she started the engine, and she drove.